In a world where civilization had collapsed, a once thriving country was now a barren wasteland, infested by the undead. The United States had become Dead America, a place where survivors were few, and even fewer dared to confront the horrors that had consumed the land. The streets that were once filled with bustling crowds now lay silent, save for the occasional moan of a zombie in search of its next victim. In the heart of what used to be a lively city, a group of survivors found themselves holed up in a dilapidated building. The group was small, only 6 in total, but they had something most others lacked: resolve. They had decided that surviving wasn't enough. They couldn't just hide in fear forever, waiting for death to find them. No, they were going to take the fight to the zombies. They called themselves the Defiants. Leader of the group was Marcus, a former military officer who had lost his family during the early days of the outbreak. With his training, he had become the backbone of the team. His calm demeanor and decisive leadership kept them focused even in the most dangerous of situations. Then there was Sarah, a brilliant mechanic who had rigged their weapons and fortified their hideout with whatever she could scavenge. Her ingenuity had saved them more times than anyone could count, turning everyday objects into life-saving devices. Next was Jake, a former firefighter who had become the group's protector. His strength and fearlessness were unmatched. He was the first to charge into a horde of zombies if it meant protecting the others. Lily was their medic. Once a nurse, now a survivor, she had patched up more wounds than she could count, always working tirelessly to keep everyone in fighting shape. Her compassion was a source of strength for the group. David, the youngest of the group, was a computer whiz. Before the outbreak, he had been a college student, studying to become a software engineer. Now, his skills were invaluable, as he hacked into abandoned security systems to gather intel on zombie movements and find hidden supplies. Finally, there was Rachel. The quiet one. She wasn't as skilled as the others, but her knowledge of the land and survival skills made her a vital part of the team. Rachel had an unshakable will to survive, and her instinct for danger had kept them one step ahead of the hordes. The group had been in their hideout for weeks, surviving off what little they could forage. They had long run out of fresh food, relying now on canned goods and whatever small animals they could catch. Despite the odds, they had held on, but that was about to change. One morning, as the sun rose, Marcus gathered the group in the main room. The walls of their hideout were lined with makeshift barricades, and every window had been covered with plywood to keep the zombies out. But Marcus knew that hiding wouldn't protect them forever. They needed to take action. We can't keep running. The food's running low, and sooner or later, the zombies will figure out where we are. We have to take the fight to them, Marcus said, his voice steady and firm. The group listened intently. This wasn't the first time Marcus had proposed such an idea, but something had changed in his tone. There was no hesitation in his voice. It was as if he had made up his mind. I say we go to the city center. There's a store there with a stockpile of weapons and supplies. If we're going to survive, we need to get them. If we don't, we're as good as dead. The group exchanged nervous glances. They knew the risks. The city center was swarming with zombies. But they also knew that Marcus was right. They couldn't live in fear forever. I'll go with you, Jake said, his voice full of determination. If we're going down fighting. Sarah, ever practical, nodded. I'll rig up some traps along the way. We'll need all the help we can get. Lily hesitated for a moment before speaking. I'll keep everyone patched up. If anyone gets hurt, I'll be there. David, always calculating, spoke up. I can scout ahead, check the security feeds, and see if it's clear. Rachel was the last to speak. Her eyes, usually filled with uncertainty, now burned with a fierce resolve. I'm with you. We're not just surviving anymore. We're fighting back. With the decision made, they gathered their gear, checked their weapons, and prepared for the journey. They knew it wouldn't be easy. They had no illusions about the dangers that lay ahead. But they were ready. As they stepped out of their hideout, the sounds of the world beyond seemed alien. The quiet had become suffocating. In the distance, they could hear the faint groans of the undead, but they didn't falter. They walked with purpose, determined to face the horde head-on, knowing that their fate rested on the success of this mission. And so, with the weight of the world on their shoulders, the Defiants began their journey into the heart of the zombie-infested city. They were no longer just survivors. They were a force to be reckoned with. The group moved cautiously through the shattered streets of what had once been a thriving city. The sky above was clouded, as if nature itself had sensed the doom that had befallen the world. Every crack in the pavement, every abandoned car, and every broken window served as a reminder of what the world had lost. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional groan of the undead or the distant echo of something shuffling in the shadows. As they moved forward, Rachel led the way, her senses sharp, every step calculated. She scanned the surroundings, constantly alert. "We're getting close to the city center," she whispered, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "Keep your eyes peeled," Marcus instructed, his hand firmly gripping his weapon as he scanned the street ahead. "The last thing we want is to be caught off guard." The group advanced, staying close, moving in a tight formation. They had learned early on that the key to survival wasn't just strength, it was coordination and teamwork. In this world, one mistake could mean the difference between life and death. After a few blocks, they reached a narrow alleyway where the group paused to regroup. They had encountered a few zombies along the way, but their quick, quiet kills ensured they wouldn't draw attention. The alley was dark and littered with debris. Rachel crouched low to the ground, her eyes scanning the area as the others checked their gear. "Keep your voices down," Jake muttered, his usual bravado gone, replaced by a tension that hung thick in the air. "We don't know how many are out there." Marcus nodded, his mind already calculating their next move. "We need to stick to the edges of the city. There are less likely to be concentrations of zombies there. Keep quiet, keep moving." Suddenly, a sound broke through the stillness, an eerie, distant groan. The sound echoed off the buildings, sending a chill down their spines. It was the unmistakable sound of the undead. And it was coming from behind them. "Damn it," Sarah muttered under her breath, glancing over her shoulder. "They're closing in." Without hesitation, Marcus raised his hand, signaling the group to move. "We don't have time to waste. Let's go. Move, now." The group bolted forward, moving as quickly and silently as possible. The zombie horde was unpredictable, and their numbers could swell without warning. The last thing they needed was to get cornered. Rachel darted ahead, her sharp instincts guiding her as she took a sharp left into another alley. The others followed close behind, making their way toward a small, overgrown park where they hoped to find some cover. They barely made it before the sound of shuffling footsteps became unmistakable. Zombies were in the streets, heading in their direction. "How many?" Marcus asked, panting slightly as he glanced over at Rachel. "At least 5, she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "Maybe more. We need to keep moving." Sarah, ever the pragmatist, pulled a few items from her pack, quickly setting up makeshift traps behind them as a backup. She had rigged a few cans together with wire, and if the zombies followed, they'd trigger a loud noise, enough to buy them precious seconds. "That should hold them off for a bit," Sarah said, her eyes scanning the surroundings. "We should be safe here for now." The group huddled together, hearts racing, trying to catch their breath. The park, though a temporary refuge, provided a brief moment of respite. The sounds of the zombies grew louder, but the traps had worked, and the zombies' moans were now mixed with the clattering of cans. They had bought themselves a few more moments. "How far are we from the weapons cache?" Jake asked, wiping sweat from his brow. "Not far," Marcus replied, looking around. "But we need to keep our wits about us. The closer we get, the more dangerous it will be." Lily, who had been silently tending to her first aid kit, checked in with each of them. "Everyone's okay for now. But we need to keep moving. The longer we stay in one place, the more vulnerable we become." Rachel nodded, her hand tightening around the makeshift knife she had taken from an abandoned shop. "We move now," she said, her voice unwavering. Marcus looked around one last time, making sure they hadn't missed anything. "All right, let's go. Stick to the plan." The group began to move again, carefully retracing their steps. The air felt thick with tension, every footstep echoing through the empty streets. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath. Every corner, every building, was a potential death trap. The reality of what they were up against hit them hard. Surviving was no longer about avoiding death, it was about fighting for their right to live. They came across a main road leading straight into the heart of the city. In the distance, they could see the silhouette of the store that housed their salvation, the weapons cache. Their destination. But as they approached, something caught Rachel's eye. A shadow moved across the street. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, but then she saw it again, something large moving behind a wrecked car. "Stay down," Rachel hissed, motioning for the others to take cover. Marcus immediately raised his weapon, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. "What is it?" "I don't know," Rachel whispered. "But it's not alone." Before anyone could react, the unmistakable sound of growling filled the air, and another figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, grotesque creature that was more than just a zombie. It was something different. The group froze, staring at the monstrous creature as it loomed in front of them, its eyes glowing with a hunger that wasn't entirely human. It was only the beginning. "You!" The creature's grotesque form seemed to tower over the wrecked car, its movements unnatural, jerky yet precise. Its skin was mottled with a dark, sickly green hue, patches of it stretched and torn as if it had been reborn through brutal force. Unlike the slow, lumbering undead they were used to, this thing moved with a terrifying speed, its eyes glistening with an unnatural hunger. The survivors instinctively stepped back, their hearts pounding in their chests. They had faced many horrors since the outbreak began, but this was something entirely different. It's not like the others," Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible as she tightened her grip on her knife. "This one is smarter." "Smarter?" Jake repeated, disbelief and fear coloring his tone. "What do you mean, smarter?" Marcus scanned the creature's movements, his military training kicking in. "It's not just a mindless zombie. This one is hunting us. It's strategizing." The others exchanged nervous glances. A sense of dread crept over them. In the New World, zombies had been a constant threat, but they had always been predictable. Slow, shambling creatures that, with the right tools and tactics, were manageable. But this was a new breed, a nightmare they hadn't prepared for. The creature took a step forward, its head swiveling, its glowing eyes locking onto the group. A low growl reverberated from deep within its throat. Lily took a step back. What if it's not just one of them? What if there's more? Before anyone could respond, a second creature emerged from the shadows, this one even larger and more terrifying. Its body was covered in an uneven layer of thick, decaying skin, and it seemed to have some sort of weaponized limb, a sharp, jagged bone protruding from its arm, as if it had been transformed by the virus into a deadly weapon. "Shit!" Sarah hissed, her voice trembling as she instinctively pulled out her makeshift explosives, a few small, homemade grenades that could at least buy them a bit of time. "We can't take them both on. We need to get out of here." But Marcus stood firm, his eyes calculating. "No, we can't retreat. We have to keep moving forward. If we let these things chase us, they'll just keep coming." David, who had been nervously glancing between the creatures, spoke up, his voice sharp with urgency. "I can hack into the old city grid. There might be security cameras we can use to track their movements, create a diversion." "Do it," Marcus ordered, his voice calm despite the danger. "But we need a plan. And fast." Sarah glanced at the others. "We need to move together, keep them distracted while David does his thing. We can't let them surround us." The creatures, sensing their hesitation, began to move closer. Their eyes fixed on the group, and a guttural snarl filled the air as they began to advance. The group had little choice now. There was no safe retreat, no more time for hesitation. "On my signal, we move," Marcus said, his voice steady but urgent. Sarah, set your traps. Jake, you're with me. We need to take the lead, make sure they don't get too close. Lily, stay back with Rachel and David. Make sure they're safe. Without another word, the group sprang into action. Sarah immediately began to rig her explosives along the streets, carefully placing them in strategic spots. If the creatures got close enough, they'd trigger the traps. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was their best shot. Jake positioned himself at the front, his stance wide, his weapon aimed at the first of the two creatures. His hands shook slightly, but there was no hesitation in his eyes. He was ready to fight. Rachel and Lily stayed close to David, who was already working on his laptop, his fingers flying over the keys as he accessed the city's old grid. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he focused. I'm in. I can see the layout of the city, and, wait, there's more. It's not just these two. They're everywhere. The group froze. More? How many were there? David continued to type rapidly, his eyes darting across the screen. There's a whole cluster of them on the other side of the block. We're surrounded. We can't outrun them, Marcus said, his voice low but firm. We fight or we die. As the creatures neared, the tension in the air was thick enough to slice through. Marcus's hand tightened around his weapon as he gave a subtle nod to Jake. The two of them took position, weapons raised, ready to engage the creatures head-on. One of the creatures, the one with the jagged bone protruding from its arm, suddenly let out a high-pitched screech, an unearthly sound that seemed to reverberate in the very air. The other creature joined in, and the shrill sound rang through the streets, sending a shiver down their spines. What the hell? Sarah muttered, her hand tightening around her trap triggers. Why are they? Before she could finish her sentence, the first creature lunged, its speed taking them all by surprise. Jake fired his weapon, but the bullet missed. The creature was too fast, too agile. It dove toward him, claws outstretched, teeth bared in a primal snarl. Jake! Lily screamed, but it was too late. The creature was upon him, and chaos erupted. In the blink of an eye, Marcus sprang into action, firing at the creature with precision, his shots aimed for its head. But it wasn't enough to stop it. The thing was relentless. And then, in the corner of his eye, Marcus saw movement. More of them, dozens of them, flooding out from the alleyways. They had been drawn by the creature's call. The group was trapped. The shrill screeches from the creatures echoed through the streets as more of the infected emerged, flooding the area from all directions. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest as he quickly scanned the chaos unfolding before him. They were surrounded. There was no safe corner left, no quick escape route. Fall back! Marcus shouted, his voice sharp with authority. We need to move, now! But there was no time for retreat. The first creature, its monstrous form impossibly fast, slashed at Jake, its jagged bone arm scraping across his side. Jake staggered back, his face contorted in pain as he fired once more, but the creature barely flinched. Jake! Sarah screamed, her voice breaking with panic. She sprinted toward him, but the second creature, faster than the first, lunged toward her with terrifying force. Rachel moved instinctively. She dove toward Sarah, shoving her out of the way just as the creature's bone arm slashed through the air, missing them by inches. Rachel's heart raced, the sound of her breath filling her ears. She wasn't sure she could keep this up. Stay close! Marcus barked. He aimed his weapon at the first creature and fired 2 shots in quick succession. This time, he didn't miss. The creature staggered back, its head torn open by the bullets, but it was far from dead. It was slowing down, but only just. We need to get out of here, now! Rachel shouted, glancing over her shoulder. The street was swarming with zombies. The number of undead had exploded, and they were quickly closing in on all sides. We can't let them overrun us. We need to keep fighting, Marcus replied, but even his voice held a trace of uncertainty. They couldn't hold them off forever. Not without a plan, Lily said, her eyes wide with fear. She looked at David, who was still frantically working on his laptop, trying to manipulate the city's infrastructure to their advantage. His hands were trembling, but his focus was unwavering. "David, hurry!" Rachel urged. "We need a way out." David's face was a mask of concentration, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "I'm trying to access the emergency systems," he muttered under his breath. "I can't guarantee anything, but if I can open the old transit lines, there might be a tunnel network underneath the city." The idea of a tunnel network felt like a lifeline. Marcus didn't hesitate. "Do it. Get us out of here." The group fought desperately as David continued his work. The first creature, now more enraged than ever, charged forward again. It leapt toward Jake, who was still recovering from the earlier wound, but Sarah stepped in front of him, firing her weapon. She didn't wait to see if the shot had landed. It was too late for hesitation. The creature hissed in fury but didn't stop its relentless pursuit. With a final surge, it pounced again. This time, it knocked Jake to the ground, its claws outstretched. "No!" Rachel yelled, rushing forward. She lunged toward the creature, her knife raised, but before she could reach it, Marcus's voice rang out, firm and commanding. "Rachel, no! Get back!" The creature's attention snapped to her. It opened its mouth wide, revealing jagged, sharp teeth, and lunged at her with a blood-curdling growl. But before it could make contact, Marcus fired 2 shots, hitting the creature's head with deadly accuracy. It collapsed, lifeless on the ground. Rachel took a step back, her breath coming in ragged gasps, the adrenaline pumping through her veins. "We can't keep doing this," she whispered. David's fingers finally stilled on the keyboard. "I've got it. The tunnels are open. We can escape through them." Without hesitation, Marcus barked, "Move." The group turned as one and sprinted down a side street, moving toward the entrance to the underground transit system. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the sounds of the undead grew louder, closer. Sarah grabbed Jake's arm, helping him to his feet. His side was bleeding heavily, but he gritted his teeth and nodded. "I'm good. Just get me out of here." "Focus," Marcus said. "We don't have time to waste." As they neared the entrance, Rachel looked back one last time. The city had become a war zone. It was a shell of its former self, a city now ruled by the undead, where once bustling streets were now filled with the eerie, relentless shuffle of the infected. The world they had known was gone, and it wasn't coming back. They reached the entrance to the transit tunnels, a rusted steel door that looked as though it hadn't been opened in years. David quickly began working on the lock, his hands trembling. Come on," he muttered, sweat dripping down his forehead. Finally, with a sharp click, the door creaked open, revealing the dark, grimy stairwell that led down into the tunnels. It was their only chance. "Go, go, go!" Marcus shouted, pushing everyone toward the door. As the group descended into the darkness, the sounds of the creatures outside were drowned out by the deafening silence of the underground. The air was stale, musty, and thick with the smell of decay, but it was a reprieve, a brief moment of safety in a world where such moments were rare. Rachel leaned against the wall, taking a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. They weren't safe yet. They had escaped the immediate danger, but the tunnels were a whole new unknown. They had no idea where they led, what other horrors might lie ahead. But for the first time in what felt like forever, they had a chance. And as long as they had that, they would fight for their survival. "We'll make it through," Marcus said, his voice steady, but filled with the same determination that had kept him going from the start. "We won't stop until we're free." They didn't know what awaited them in the darkness, but one thing was certain, they would face it together. The dark tunnel stretched out before them, an endless void of shadows and echoes. The group moved in single file, the faint light of their flashlights casting long, wavering shadows against the grimy walls. The air was thick with dust, stale, and oppressive, and every step felt as though it carried them further from the world they once knew. "Is this it?" Lily asked, her voice tight with uncertainty. She glanced nervously over her shoulder, as if expecting something to jump out of the darkness at any moment. I mean, we're really going into this? We don't even know where it leads. Do we have a choice? Marcus replied, his voice low but resolute. We can't go back. It's the only chance we've got. David, still clutching his laptop, hurried to keep pace with the rest of the group. I think I can track the tunnels from the grid, but I'll need a minute to make sure we're heading in the right direction. Sarah, who had been scanning the tunnel ahead, nodded. Just, don't take too long. I don't like the feeling of being underground. It's too quiet. Jake, though still clearly hurting from his earlier injuries, managed a weak chuckle. I think everything feels too quiet these days. They continued walking in silence, the only sounds their footsteps and the occasional drip of water echoing off the walls. The further they descended, the more the tunnel seemed to stretch on endlessly. The sense of confinement weighed heavily on them, and even the bravest of the group couldn't shake the feeling of unease gnawing at their nerves. Rachel reached out and placed a hand on David's shoulder. Do you know where we're going? She asked, trying to mask the anxiety in her voice. David paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard of his laptop. His brow furrowed in concentration, but he gave her a tight smile. We're headed toward the old industrial district. According to the map, there's a maintenance area down there. It should have a way out. We'll be fine. Rachel wasn't entirely convinced, but she didn't say anything. They had no other options. They had no choice but to trust David, even if the uncertainty gnawed at her insides. Suddenly, a loud, distant crash echoed through the tunnel. It was so faint at first, they almost missed it. But then, it came again, louder this time. The unmistakable sound of something heavy being thrown or smashed. A chill ran down Rachel's spine. What was that? She asked, her voice trembling. Marcus froze, holding up a hand for silence. The group stopped in their tracks, straining their ears. The sound came again, followed by a growl, a low, guttural snarl that sent a shock wave of panic through the group. Damn it, Marcus muttered under his breath. He motioned for the group to move quickly. Stay close. We don't know what that is, but we need to keep moving. They're close. Who's close? Sarah asked, her eyes darting nervously. Zombies. The infected. They're coming, Marcus answered. Without warning, a high-pitched screech shattered the silence, sending a wave of terror through the survivors. It was the same sound they had heard earlier, only this time it was closer, much closer. The echo of footsteps grew louder as the creatures drew near. Rachel's heart pounded in her chest as she felt the adrenaline surge once again. She glanced over at Jake, who was still limping but keeping pace, his face twisted with pain and determination. He was hurting, but he was still here, still fighting. David hastily typed something on his laptop. We need to keep moving, he said urgently. There's a small service tunnel up ahead. If we take it, we can double back and lose them. Do it, Marcus ordered. Lead the way. David's fingers flew over the keys as the group pushed forward, hoping they weren't already too late. They rounded a bend in the tunnel, and the service door came into view, just as they heard the unmistakable shuffle of undead feet behind them. Lily looked over her shoulder, her breath quickening. They're getting closer. Hurry! David reached the service door and tried the handle. It was locked. He pulled a crowbar from his bag and wedged it into the doorframe, forcing it open with a loud creak. Go! Go! Marcus urged. The group scrambled through the narrow door into the service tunnel. It was even darker here, the walls slick with grime, but there was no time to waste. They moved quickly, trying to keep their footsteps quiet. Behind them, the sound of the creatures grew louder. Rachel glanced back one last time and caught a glimpse of shadowy figures emerging from the main tunnel. They were close, but they hadn't caught up yet. Not yet. The group rounded a corner and found themselves in a small, cramped passage. There was only one way forward. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the walls seemed to press in on them as they hurried along. How much further? Sarah panted, wiping sweat from her forehead. Not far, David responded, his voice strained. Just a little longer. I can see a map for an emergency exit up ahead. We're almost there. But just as the hope of escape started to swell, a sudden screech echoed from the shadows in front of them. It was closer, much closer. Then, the unmistakable sound of dragging feet. Shit! They're right behind us. Jake yelled. Marcus's mind raced as he scanned the dark passage ahead. They were almost at the emergency exit, but the zombies were closing in. The group had no choice but to make a stand. We fight. Marcus ordered, his voice cutting through the panic. We hold them off just a little longer. We've come too far to lose now. As the creature's screeches grew louder, the survivors braced themselves. There was no turning back. The eerie screeching of the zombies was now deafening. The survivors could hear the unmistakable shuffle of their feet, the bone-chilling growls rising from behind them. They were close, too close. The weight of the moment pressed down on them like a suffocating blanket. Marcus motioned for everyone to stop, his voice low and steady. Get ready. We're going to have to fight. Stay close, and keep moving forward as soon as we have a chance. Rachel's pulse was racing, her hands slick with sweat around the handle of her weapon. She wasn't sure how much more she could take, but there was no time to think about that now. The group had survived this long by working together, and that was the only way they'd make it out alive. David, still clutching his laptop, was breathing hard. There's no time to waste, he muttered, his eyes flicking nervously down the passageway. They'll be on us in seconds. Sarah turned to him. Is there any way to open the exit faster? David shook his head. It's complicated. I'm trying, but I need a little more time to bypass the lock. Just keep them off me. A growl came from the darkness ahead, cutting through their conversation. It was followed by the telltale shuffle of feet. We don't have time for a little more time, Marcus growled, his eyes scanning the tunnel. We have to push through. Now. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the far end of the tunnel, its silhouette growing clearer with every step. The creature was tall and twisted, with sunken eyes and rotting flesh. It was followed by another, then another. They were closing in from both sides. Rachel's heart pounded. It's a dead end up ahead. We can't go forward anymore. Marcus quickly surveyed the tunnel. It was true, there was nowhere to run. No more choices. He turned to the group. Get ready for the fight of our lives. We take them down one by one. The first zombie reached them, its grotesque face contorted into a snarl. Rachel wasted no time. She stepped forward and swung her knife in a wide arc, catching the zombie in the side of its head. The creature crumpled to the ground, but more kept coming. Stay together. Marcus barked as the group spread out in a defensive formation. He raised his weapon and fired at the next approaching zombie, hitting it square in the chest. It staggered back but didn't fall. Marcus cursed under his breath. They were stronger than he remembered. Lily was already moving, her weapon poised and ready as she charged toward a second zombie, her sharp blade slicing through its throat with a swift motion. But the creature didn't die. Instead, it seemed to be more furious, more relentless than before. It lunged at her, its hands reaching for her throat. Lily! Rachel screamed, rushing forward to help. With a powerful kick, she sent the zombie sprawling backward. It wasn't enough to stop it, but it gave Lily the precious moments she needed to scramble away from the creature. Behind them, more zombies emerged from the shadows, their numbers multiplying with each passing second. The group was surrounded. David, how much longer? Marcus demanded, his voice tight with urgency. I'm trying. David called back, typing furiously on his laptop. The code's almost bypassed, just a few more seconds. But seconds were precious. They didn't have the luxury of time. Jake, despite his injuries, gritted his teeth and rushed forward to take down another zombie. He grunted in pain as his side was jostled, but he didn't falter. Every swing of his bat brought him closer to the enemy. With each strike, the zombies grew more vicious, more desperate. "Stay focused," Marcus called out again. "This is our only shot." Just then, the ground shook beneath them, a sudden, intense vibration that sent a wave of dread through the group. The creatures were coming faster now. They were everywhere. No matter how many they killed, more kept coming, as if they were drawn by the scent of human flesh. "Push forward," Marcus shouted. With no other choice, the survivors pressed onward, forcing their way through the growing sea of undead. There was no safe place, no reprieve. Each step felt like a battle, each swing of the weapon an act of desperation. David's voice pierced the chaos. "I've got it. The exit's open. Move!" Marcus barked, his heart hammering in his chest. "Move, now!" The group surged forward, pushing through the final wave of zombies with every ounce of strength they had left. Rachel, her breathing heavy, kept her eyes fixed on the small sliver of light ahead, the only indication that they were heading in the right direction. The smell of death and decay was overpowering, and the air felt thick with the weight of their fight. As they neared the exit, the last of the zombies lunged at them with terrifying speed. Rachel whipped around, slashing with her knife just in time to catch one in the chest. The creature stumbled backward, its momentum lost, but another was already coming in its place. Jake grabbed the creature by its decaying arm and pulled it off of Rachel, throwing it into the wall. But more were closing in. "We're almost there," Sarah shouted, panic in her voice. Rachel didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. They were so close. They were almost free. With a final push, the group reached the exit, a large metal door that stood between them and the unknown. David's fingers flew across the keypad one last time, and with a loud click, the door swung open. The light from outside blinded them momentarily as they stepped through the threshold. They were out. They had escaped. But as they looked around, they realized the nightmare wasn't over. The world outside was no safer than the one they had left behind. The city was a wasteland, filled with the same horrors they had left behind in the tunnels. And somewhere, deep in the distance, more creatures stirred, waiting for the next battle to begin. The survivors stood in the blinding sunlight, their eyes adjusting to the overwhelming brightness after the darkness of the tunnels. The air felt different here, fresher, but still heavy with the stench of decay. The city, once a bustling center of life, now lay in ruins. Abandoned cars littered the streets, overturned and burned, remnants of a society that had long since crumbled. The world outside the tunnels was just as unforgiving, just as dangerous. "Is this it?" Sarah whispered, her voice shaky with disbelief. "Is this really all that's left?" Rachel looked around at the desolate skyline. Buildings stood like skeletal remains of a forgotten civilization. The silence was suffocating, the kind of silence that spoke of a world ravaged by time and violence. "We need to keep moving," Marcus said firmly, snapping the group out of their reverie. "This place won't be safe for long. The zombies are everywhere, and there's no telling how many more are still lurking. We have to find shelter, fast." David, still clutching his laptop like a lifeline, was already scanning the surrounding area. "There's a safe house marked on the map. It's about a mile from here, on the outskirts of the city. We should make it before nightfall if we keep moving." "But we can't just run blindly into the unknown," Rachel protested. "What if it's a trap? We can't trust anything out here." "I get it," Marcus replied, his voice hard but understanding. "But it's the best shot we've got right now. Staying in the open is suicide. We're not in a position to be picky." They all knew he was right. It was survival, plain and simple. But that didn't make the decision any easier. They had just come from one nightmare, the last thing they wanted was to walk right into another. The group began moving forward, walking cautiously down the deserted street. Every creak of a nearby building, every breeze that stirred the leaves on the ground, set their nerves on edge. The sense of danger was constant, the feeling that something, or someone, was always watching them. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath. As they walked, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see a zombie creeping up behind them. She tried to tell herself it was just paranoia, but the unease lingered. Lily, walking beside her, nudged her shoulder. "You okay?" Rachel forced a smile. "Yeah, just a little on edge. This place feels wrong." "I know what you mean," Lily said. "It's like everything here is broken. Not just the buildings, but everything. The whole world." "I don't think it was ever supposed to end like this," Rachel replied, her voice quiet. "The world was never prepared for something like this." They didn't have time for more discussion. There was too much at stake, too much danger ahead. The group kept moving, each step taking them further into the heart of the abandoned city. The silence between them was only broken by the occasional rustle of wind or the distant growl of a zombie. It was as if the world had become a graveyard, where life had been snuffed out in an instant. The survivors were the last remnants of humanity, but they weren't safe, not by any means. In this world, survival was an unrelenting battle, and there was no such thing as a guaranteed victory. After what felt like hours of walking, they reached the outskirts of the city. The tall buildings began to thin out, and open fields stretched out before them. There, nestled in the distance, stood an old farmhouse, its roof sagging, its windows shattered, but still standing. The safe house David had mentioned. "There it is," David said, pointing toward the farmhouse. "It's our best shot. Let's get there before dark." The group quickened their pace, the weight of exhaustion settling on their shoulders. They had been running on adrenaline for too long, and it was starting to catch up with them. But they couldn't afford to stop. Not yet. As they neared the farmhouse, they noticed something strange. The front door was wide open, swinging on its hinges in the wind. Marcus held up his hand, signaling for the group to stop. "Something's not right," he muttered, his eyes scanning the surroundings. David stepped forward, lowering his laptop to his side. "We need to check it out. We can't be sure if anyone's here, or what's here. Or if it's safe," Rachel added, her voice barely a whisper. They approached the farmhouse cautiously, weapons at the ready. As they stepped inside, the creaking of the wooden floorboards echoed through the empty house. The air was thick with dust, the smell of mildew and decay hanging in the air. The place was clearly abandoned, but there was something unsettling about the stillness. Rachel stepped into the kitchen, her heart racing. There were signs of recent activity, a can of food overturned on the counter, a half-filled cup of coffee on the table. But no one was here. "We're not alone," Sarah said, her voice tight with fear. "There's something off about this place." Marcus nodded grimly. "Agreed. We'll search the house. Stay alert." The group spread out, each of them taking a different room. They moved silently, each corner they turned increasing the tension in their veins. As Rachel passed through the hallway, she noticed a faint trail of muddy footprints leading upstairs. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Upstairs." The group converged at the base of the staircase. Rachel swallowed hard. Whatever was upstairs, it wasn't going to be good. They could only hope they were ready for whatever awaited them. With a quick glance at Marcus, they began their ascent. The stairs creaked under their weight as the survivors ascended, their weapons tightly gripped in their hands. The air in the upstairs hallway was stale, the faint smell of rot mixing with the mustiness of the old house. The darkness ahead seemed to deepen as they moved, as if it were waiting to swallow them whole. Rachel could feel her pulse pounding in her ears, each step bringing them closer to whatever lay beyond the shadows. "Stay close," Marcus whispered, his voice low but urgent. They reached the top of the stairs and moved cautiously down the narrow hallway. The floorboards groaned, adding to the eerie tension that hung in the air. They stopped in front of a closed door. The faint sound of breathing came from the other side. It was shallow, labored, almost as if someone, or something, was trying to remain silent. "Is someone in there?" David asked, his voice barely audible. Rachel nodded, her hand shaking slightly as she reached for the doorknob. She hesitated for a moment before twisting it slowly, the door creaking open just a crack. Inside, the dim light revealed a figure hunched in the corner of the room, its back turned toward them. "Hello?" Marcus called, his voice steady but filled with caution. The figure stirred, its movements jerky and unnatural. It slowly turned to face them, and for a moment, no one moved. The face that looked back at them was gaunt, with sunken eyes and skin hanging loose in ragged patches. Its mouth was twisted in a grotesque grin, its teeth yellowed and sharp. But it wasn't a zombie. This was a person, or at least, it had once been. The figure blinked, its eyes unseeing. It opened its mouth and rasped, "Help, please." Rachel's heart dropped into her stomach. This wasn't just any survivor. This was someone who had been changed, twisted by the infection, but not fully turned. "Not yet." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "What happened to you?" The man's lips trembled. I was bitten. A while ago. But I fought it. I'm not like them, not yet. But it's coming. It's coming." The group stood in stunned silence, trying to make sense of the situation. The man's words were chilling, and the more they looked at him, the more they realized the extent of his transformation. The infection was slow, but it was clearly taking hold. "We have to kill him," David said, his voice tight with dread. Rachel recoiled. "We can't just kill him. He's still human." "No, he's not," Marcus said firmly, his voice dark and resolute. "He's dangerous, and the longer we wait, the more chance he'll turn. We can't afford that." The man's breathing grew ragged. "Please, I don't want to become one of them. I can feel it, every second. I feel it crawling under my skin. I don't want to hurt anyone." Rachel's heart ached at the desperate plea in his voice. He wasn't a monster yet. He was still human, just trying to survive in an unforgiving world. But they had seen firsthand what the zombies could do, how quickly the infection could spread. They knew better than anyone that there was no such thing as half-dead, not when it came to survival. If they let him go, if they hesitated, they were all at risk. Lily stepped forward, her face set with determination. "We can't take chances. We're already outnumbered, and we don't know what we're dealing with out there." Marcus nodded, stepping forward. "I'm sorry." With a swift motion, he pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, echoing in the small room. The man's body slumped to the floor, his eyes wide in shock, his face frozen in the same twisted expression he'd had moments before. The group stood still, the weight of what they'd just done hanging heavy in the air. No one said anything for a long time. Rachel finally broke the silence. "He wasn't one of them, not yet." Marcus turned to her, his face grim. "I know. But he would have been. We don't get to make mistakes like that out here. Every decision counts." David wiped his face with his sleeve, his expression hard. "We don't have the luxury of mercy. Not anymore." The silence stretched between them as they all absorbed the gravity of the moment. Each survivor felt a gnawing ache in their chest, but they knew there was no room for hesitation. In the world they now inhabited, mercy was a luxury they couldn't afford. The group began to file out of the room, their movements slow and heavy. The weight of the decision lingered with each step they took. The house, once a potential safe haven, now felt even more oppressive. The walls seemed to close in around them, as if the very structure of the house were suffocating them. Outside, the sky was beginning to darken, casting long shadows over the empty landscape. The horde of zombies was still a very real threat, and the survivors knew that they couldn't afford to rest for long. "There's no time to waste," Marcus said, breaking the silence. "We need to keep moving. The zombies are getting more aggressive, and this place won't stay safe for long." David, his eyes still heavy with the burden of their choice, nodded. "Let's go. We've got a long way to go, and we're not out of danger yet." With one last look at the house behind them, the group turned and began walking into the uncertain night, the distant sounds of the undead following them, ever present. The world outside was unforgiving, but it was the world they had to survive in. And survive they would, together. For as long as it took.